sharing their experience from tech leaders to tech leaders. This is CTO Talks.
Hello and welcome. This is Marcin Jabłonowski, and I have a pleasure to host today Michael Avrukin, Director of Engineering at Angi. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Marcin. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. It's good to have you here, and it's gonna be probably a very exciting episode. But before we delve into the topic of the episode, I think it makes sense to set the scene. So it would be great to know something about your background and what do you do for a living, and then we can talk about this because I think the topic is mostly based on your experience, which is now a past experience, but I think this is the valuable lessons learned.
Sure. Sounds good. Happy to do that. My name is Michael Avrukin. Today's March 1st as we're recording this. I joined Angi in end of December. Angi, for folks outside of the United States, is a company based here in the US that does a lot of home services. So if you need to get everything from your roof repair to replacing a faucet, electrical work, it's a platform for people to get those professionals. It's really three companies: Angi, Home Advisor, and Handy. It's a fairly large company. They do about $1.5 billion a year in revenue, so it's not a small player or a small startup. I joined in February to help build out the product foundation platform team, which is essentially helping to unify all the product ecosystems and focus on things like analytics, identity, profiling, ML, so all of the functionality that's been used across the product as a unified unit. Before that, I spent 9 years at Google. Most recently, the last 5.5 years of that, managing the Google Sheets infrastructure and mobile teams, helping to scale to that product to about 400 million users or so, helping to increase data set, storage size, scaling the team, scaling the product, scaling revenue, all those fun things. Before Google, I did some startups. I think the one that people heard about is called LinkedIn. That's how you found me, through LinkedIn. So I was there pre the IPO and through the IPO. Quick fun note, last night I was at a dinner hosted by JFrog, Artifactory. So I was one of the people responsible for getting Artifactory back in 2011 deployed in LinkedIn. At that point, I was still very much an IC and getting them off the ground. So we were actually one of their first customers, major customers, and it was a very fun to see a full circle experience from what we were doing 13 years ago with Artifactory there, how they scaled. It was pre-Series A for them, pre-any real revenue. And it was a very special experience. The fun thing was I thought I was a special person. Turned out the guy sitting next to me at the table with the CEO was the first guy that wrote the 6-digit customer check to Shlomi, who's the CEO. And so I got to hear about that story as well. But that's a little bit of my background. So I did LinkedIn, and then before that, a few other startups. I went initially to San Jose State studying computer science, and then I left, and then my parents wanted me to go back and finish my school. So I wanted to go back to San Jose State. They didn't want me back, so I went to Harvard, and I graduated from Harvard a little bit as a I'll show you San Jose State. If you don't want me back, somebody else will. So my degree's from Harvard in computer science.
Yeah. So when we were doing a prep for this episode, you said that your experience and time spent at Google was special or unique, like out of everything that you've done in the past. And I think it's very important that you were like in a management role there, right? And you sent me a draft of a blog article that you're planning to publish soon, as far as I understand, about 9 lessons you learned from working at Google. And I think this is the topic of today. And these are the 9 lessons, like from a perspective of a manager, right? So I think it would be great if you could walk us through probably there are more lessons but these are the ones, the key ones. So that can be interesting to the audience, to our viewers who are maybe considering joining Google. And I think it's quite commonly known that working or the culture at big names like Google, Amazon, Microsoft is quite special, unique. So if anyone is considering, I think these 9 lessons can be quite interesting. So Michael, could you share
Sure.
the story?
Sounds good. So after 9 years, I spent a fair amount of time writing online. I published my content in different places. So after I left, I wrote a post was a little bit more negative in terms of why I chose to leave, because people often ask you, like, why in the world would you leave a company like Google? And they had lots of reasons for it, really. But I didn't want to paint it as, hey, there's only negative. I actually learned a whole lot, and I grew during my time at Google tremendously. It was many ways a very positive experience as well. So I said, okay, 9 years, maybe I can put a blog post that sort of catches the eye called 9 lessons. And I wrote down essentially sort of these top 9 lessons that I learned during my 9 years at Google. I will run through them, and then we can dive deep into them. So I think that at the top of the list was design documents. As you were talking, I just pulled it up in front of me so I can reference it. Design documents was number 1, and I can dive deep into what I mean by that. Number 2, feeling comfortable into diving deep into technical issues, especially as a manager. Focusing on automation. This is another key detail that I think a lot of organizations miss. The idea of a blameless postmortem. That one is a really big, prominent idea at Google, that when you do postmortems, they're blameless. You don't blame people, you blame processes, you blame systems, you blame architectural decisions, you don't blame people. Error budgets. Error budgets is like one of those wild ideas that I'm happy to speak about more, because once you see them, it's a little bit hard to unsee it. Focusing on clarity and communication. There's a high rigor within the organization about how you communicate and making sure that it's clear, precise, and it's actionable. Focusing on speed of iteration over quality of iteration. So that the idea that moving quickly is much, much more important than getting it right the first time, being able to sort of fix and go quickly through those cycles. Trusting each other. There's a really big emphasis on trust within the organization, and trusting that the people you work with are going to do their job, they're going to rise to the standards expected of them, and really focusing on that element. And then the final one is transparency. Google internally is an exceptionally transparent company. Everybody's OKRs are open. Design documents are usually open by default. Decisions are open by default. You can reach out to anybody. You can see all the code. Everything is transparent. And that really helps to increase velocity, and really goes back to the trust element. But that was sort of this other element in terms of building transparency within the organization. So these are like these 9 items that I'm happy to dive into any one of them specifically.
Perfect. So, I mean, I've heard about some of those things. Probably some come from other places. It's nothing that Google invented. However, what I'm seeing is that many technological companies creating technological products are trying to replicate more or less what Google is doing. And I think it's mostly about culture. It's not about processes. Yeah, I think the culture is even more important. So it would be great if you could, walk us through one by one and dive deeper, because some things are not commonly known, right? Or may not be commonly known.
So I'll start at the top one. I think design documents, which is probably sounds like a really strange place to start from. Like, why in the world would you talk about design documents? It's like, why? It's probably something that is completely out of the realm of anybody else. But it's for somebody who's outside of Google considering joining in, it is either something you're going to like, or it's something that's going to give you a lot of pause. The primary, what I would like to describe the currency within the organization, is the design document and the design document process, where you are expected to be writing a lot and to be reading even more. And there's a high emphasis on writing design documents that really go deep into the problem, not superficially. That you can show really deep analysis of data, deep analysis of systems, deep analysis of architectural decisions, and being able to dive into those kinds of problems, document them, and then argue for a position and outcome. And then you have to set it out for review and get the feedback from a lot of people, and then iterate on it until you get to a place where either you say, hey, this was a bad idea, and you dump it, or you take it and you say, yep, this is what we're going to do. And then we need to translate this idea, we need to translate this framework into actionable, concrete deliverables and milestones, and then you own it all the way through.
Okay. And is it like design this is something that reminds me of like technical design or architectural design. Does it apply only to technical aspects, or also to other kind of decisions that you're trying to push through? And what would be something in the scope of engineering manager, for instance?
Yeah, it's a good question. So if you will find that design documents are used universally, from UX decisions, UXR, i.e. the research side of things, systems decisions, architectural decisions. Even when we do reorgs, when we are thinking through how we're going to restructure the organization, you tend to start with a design document and talk through like, okay, this is what we want to do. This is why we want to do this reorganization. This is how we're going to go about doing it. For engineering managers, because the second item that I often talk about is you have to be able to go in deep technically, is you need to set the standard for your team of what's expected in terms of what they're doing. And then you have to read those design documents, provide feedback, provide guidance, provide mentoring. You're not always going to have senior engineers and staff engineers reporting to you. You're going to have at times people who just graduated out of college. You're going to have people who, been in the industry for 3 or 5 years, or coming from other companies where this was not the standard. And so you have to coach them and develop them into doing this well. And if you don't know how to do it well yourself, it's very hard to coach. And so you have to be writing these design documents yourself. I don't know of any successful Google engineering manager and leader that does not produce at least some of these design documents on a technical level. At the end of the day, if you're trying to steer your organization in a particular direction, you have to be able to articulate it in a design document format. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? What are the components? You don't need to have the specificity of all the details for those sub-projects and sub-teams, but you need to have the comfort to articulate, what are the big stones, what are the big milestones, and then be able to delegate that work to your team for them to execute on. But you need to have comfort and be able to write those documents and articulate them and stand behind those decisions and dive into those discussions. And if you don't, you're not going to be successful at Google.
Okay. And what's the purpose of these documents? Something that comes to my mind at first glance is that before you make any kind of decision, it's well thought through. So you thought about all the aspects, like you're trying to build a new startup and you need to do a SWOT analysis and prepare a business case. Maybe you can say because, many companies don't do this. They just act. Yeah. They just do the stuff.
Yeah. There are really, I would argue, 2 reasons to it. Reason number 1, which I think now is more obvious than ever before, is that your team is not sitting next to you. The people you're interacting with are all over the world. They are sitting in anywhere from Warsaw or Krakow in Poland. We have teams there. They're sitting in Zurich, in Dublin, in Singapore, in Japan, in Mountain View, in New York. You can't get all of those people in the room every single time you have to make a decision. You need to have a format that you can get everybody behind what's going on. So that's number 1. It's just for the sake of transparency and communication. Number 2, it forces you to think about what you're doing and why you're doing it and how you're going to be executing on that vision. If your analysis is flawed in that document, somebody can call it out. If your assumptions are flawed, somebody can call it out. If you missed something or a detail or you're missing some consideration, putting it down, you can call it out. Slowing down in the beginning of a project is actually super critical. I'm dealing with a team right now that jumped into a work area a couple of months ago, 5-6 months ago before I joined, and they're just all over the place. They're struggling. They can't really get things launched. And when you look at it, you realize they just jumped in and started doing things and they weren't bothered to do the thinking about what is it that we're doing. And so one of the first things that we actually did after I joined here at Angi was to make this team for one of their projects, not even a big one, to say, okay, no, we're going to do a design first. And we did the design, and they actually went through that process and they did the analysis, and then they realized they missed something. They came back to it. And then when it came down to implementing it, they actually got it done in 2.5 weeks, and it launched with everything in place, with the testing in place and the instrumentation in place and the dashboards in place and the metrics, and it all just worked, right? Because they did the initial work up front as opposed to just jumping in and doing it and then patching it afterwards. So it's really important to sit down and pause and take a breath. And I know there's always time pressure. I know there's always that feeling, well, we're a startup. We just need to move quickly. I'm telling you, those 2 days that you spend thinking about the problem are just going to, save you 2 months down the road. So just, slow down. It's okay. It's not going to slow you down in the end.
And it also reminds me to something that was a basis of for Google algorithm back in the days. So these research papers and the review process in the scientific world. I assume this is where it's coming from. Okay, let's get down to the next point.
Sure. So I think the next one on my list was much more about diving deep. And I've seen managers come in from outside of Google, and a lot of times they don't feel comfortable diving into the issues. And what winds up happening is that over time, I don't want to say even over time, they just never gain the credibility of their team. You need to have the comfort to roll up your sleeves and go deep into technical issues. And you need to be able to go, sometimes, yes, it's down to the very nitty gritty of the code, and sometimes it's down to the nitty gritty of some weird config issue. But you have to have the confidence and the ability to go deep, understand the protocols, understand the nuances, understand how the machinery works and how it functions and how the pieces come together. And if you can't dive deep, you're really going to struggle. It's one of those areas where you won't be able to function within the organization. Just focusing on quote unquote people and process and, who do we put on this project next? You can't do that. Like, it's just, it doesn't work that way. One of the most impressive things I think you find at Google with great leaders is that you have VPs that you can pull into a room. This is a VP that has, 1,000 people, 1,500 people reporting to them. And you mention to them a project, and the good VPs will right away be like, oh, yeah, I saw an update about this. I have a question. And they'll go in like really super deep into a very precise area and be like, how are you thinking about thing X, Y, and Z? And you're just like, I didn't think about that, right? And they're like, because they're so technically in touch, they can pick up on some of these edge cases very, very quickly. And so that's a very special thing. And then you have the other ones who, the moment you start talking to them, their eyes glaze over, they have no idea, and they just sort of excuse themselves from the conversation and walk away. And I've seen these folks come into the organization, and within a year, at most 2, they're out. They just don't succeed. So be comfortable roll your sleeves up. So if you're a people manager, and you've been a people manager for 5, 10, 20 years, whatever, I don't care how long, and you think you're going to come to Google and just coast without having to roll up your sleeves, you're not going to do well. You'll be out of there in 18, 24 months, and you'll be very disappointed, and you'll have a big self-esteem hit. So feel comfortable rolling up your sleeves.
And how does it work with trying to empower people at the very bottom to make decisions on their own? Don't they feel like, I don't know, that you're trying to make them look foolish just because?
Yeah, so that's actually, that's a big element of working at Google, is that you need to have a pretty thick. There's 2 elements. So you need to have a pretty thick skin. At Google, one of the things you'll find is that if you're very sensitive to feedback, if you are very sensitive to people saying that what you're presenting isn't the brightest of ideas, you're not going to survive. People are pretty direct. They'll tell you that what you're doing is sort of bonkers or whatever, whichever way you want to slice it. That's number 1. Number 2, it matters how you ask those questions, right? You're not telling people what to do. You have to be aware of the details, which means if you're looking at a design document, be ready to ask those precise questions. Well, have you thought about this? Or have you checked them with that team? Or, I remember this particular issue that came up, or I remember this particular problem that arose. Did we think about how we're going to address this? Oh, I see we have this features coming from the pipeline down in the roadmap. I know you're probably not aware of them, but how are we going to integrate those features or those asks into this roadmap? So you can be involved in those kinds of details without telling people the how. You can ask them a lot of the whys that essentially show that you understand the details and you're aware of what's happening, and you can flag problems when they arise.
And you're actually making a thought-provoking process so that people start thinking about aspects they haven't initially considered, right? So I think This is also part of these design documents, yeah? So these are other elements you should probably add to the documents.
Exactly.
Okay. Next lesson?
So next one was more in automation. So I think people think they have automation until they come to Google, then they see automation at Google, and you're just like, okay, well, that's magic, right? So effectively, you can go from code to production just by committing the code. And it's not just the fact that it's sort of CI/CD that gets things done, but it's the fact that you have the CI/CD that builds, then pushes, then verifies, then does regression analysis, then make sure that everything passes. then gathers all the statistics, adds all of the instrumentation. I was doing an interview with a company. I'm not going to mention the company name. This was probably like 7-8 months ago. And they said to me, well, you didn't really talk about how do you instrument your services. And I said, what do you mean I didn't talk about it? It's like I built the system that automatically instruments all services. There's an internal system in Google called Bach. I worked on Bach. It's a microservice architecture. When you create a Bach service, you automatically get all of your analytics, instrumentation, and learning out of the box. Done. You don't have to worry about it. When you create an endpoint, it's automatically instrumented. If you need to add extra business-specific instrumentation, great, you can do that. But out of the box, you get all of the instrumentation, all of the alerting, all of the monitoring, all of the deployment. Like, it just comes. It's built for you, right? So you don't have to worry about it and reinvent the wheel. And in Angi, it's one of the interesting things I'm seeing. Teams here, they have a fair amount of automation, but when it comes to dashboards, when it comes to reporting and alerting, they're doing it every single time over and over again for new services. And you would look at that at Google and they would say, no, just like write the thing that will automate it in perpetuity. So you never have to come back to this. And so there's this huge emphasis on automation. One of the things I like to tell people is that the entire Google Sheets team, everybody, engineering, product management, UX, our quants, everybody you can imagine, was about 70 people, 75 people or so at most. Like managers, the whole thing. It's not that many people. Excel is 1,000 people. So we were one-to-one with Excel, and we were doing it in less than 1/10 of the manpower. How? How are we doing that? And that's because there's just such a huge emphasis on automation and such a huge emphasis on we're leveraging the repeatability. Docs, slides, sheets, all of those products together, that entire org is less than 300 people. And people, it sort of shocks them, like, how in the world are you shipping these kinds of products with 300 people? And these are, if you look at the Microsoft equivalent, it is like so many times bigger. And the reason is that there's just a huge amount of emphasis on like, we don't repeat ourselves. We do it once. I'll give you a great specific example. On Google Sheets, the calculation engine is written in Java. And it's written in Java once, and it's tested in once. And then it is transpiled to JavaScript. It is transpiled to iOS, and it is transpiled to Android Java, and also obviously the server-side Java. So we have a guarantee that we're not going to introduce a new bug or a new issue by, doing it specifically for each platform. We do it once, and we invested in the tooling to transpile each of those platforms. We invested in the tooling to validate there's no regressions in the transpilation pipeline, and that's it. You're done, right? And so that leverages you tremendously. And so there's a big emphasis on automation, whatever you do and all the projects that you work on, and just be able to come in there and say, okay, the moment that somebody does something like twice, you're like, nope, stop, automate it, because I don't want to do it again in the future.
Mm-hmm. And what would be interesting to me, and I hope for the viewers as well, is who's responsible for the automation? So is it like the product teams or, engineering teams? Or are there separate teams like DevOps or platform engineering teams who are focused on the automation? Because it really matters how you structure it.
It's both. You have some of the, something like the CI/CD pipeline and all the tooling. There's obviously dedicated teams to that. The entire source ecosystem is hugely complex. It's its own like 300-person, 400-person org that just deals with everything related to source code and source code analysis and build, release, all that kind of stuff. So they do that part. But within our product ecosystem, we're responsible for our own automation. We're responsible for building it and ensuring that. And the way that happens, and that's going back to the previous question, which is, as an engineering manager, you have to dive deep because you need to understand what are the patterns, what's happening. And if you see one engineer doing something, it happened once, and then you see another engineer doing essentially the same thing, you need to have the technical ability to say, okay, next quarter, I'm going to put this person's time to make sure the automation's in place. Because I don't want to be, again, having folks doing this kind of process. So we put, you are then carving out dedicated time in the subsequent quarter, or even maybe within this quarter, to say, you know what? Let's pause. I know we have other things in the pipeline, but we should build this automation first. We should build this tooling first, because then we can reuse it and repeat it, and we're not going to be in the cycle all over again. So it's really on the engineering leadership. It's on the technical leadership to be able to spot those areas, figure out what the investment looks like, and then build it and put it in place.
Okay. And this is about SDLC. How about other processes in the organizations? Are they equally automated?
Yeah. Oh God. There's just it's the you file a ticket for like, hey, my keyboard's broken or whatever, random things. There's just sort of a huge amount of automation in that side of things. You create a group for really, but there's just, it's almost hard to imagine how like everything you could possibly, like any touch point within the organization where a human might have to do something more than once is like invariably somehow automated. Like there's just, it's hard to articulate that level. It's everything from people processes to product processes to monitoring to, pick a thing. There's just a huge amount of automation all over the place.
Okay, awesome.
I'll give you a quick example. This is a great one. You know how people sometimes need, hey, I need a job verification letter that actually work for the company, and it depends what it's for. And so they used to have to send a request 9 years ago when I joined. If you needed one for like, buying a house or car, whatever it is, right? You have to send an email to HR, and then they would like generate it for you, and it would take like 2 days. And then they put a system together called Scribe. And in Scribe, effectively what they do is you come in there, it knows who you are. You say what kind of letter you need, what you need on that letter. Like, I need this for this, I need this, my title and my salary, whatever it is. You hit the button and it generates it with a full signature. You just download it and it's done.
So now it's probably Gemini generating this.
Maybe, right? But it was auto-generated. It filled out all the information, and you don't need to involve HR anymore. You just click the button and it's done.
Okay, that was the third one. What's next?
Sure. Blameless postmortem. So this one, this
one
was
this is a good one.
Let's go on. Yeah. So I initially joined on SRE side. So SRE, people think that Google is reliable. God, there's the amount of duct tape and outages that are happening all the time is insane internally. It's just it's crazy. But over time, obviously, it gets better. So one of the things that they do is whenever there's a big outage, you do a postmortem, and the postmortems are blameless. You never, ever, ever blame people. You always blame processes and systems. Even when it's very obvious that somebody's really screwed up, you say, well, how could we have had the systems to prevent this in the first place? I'll share a story. We were doing a big migration and update of a bunch of schemas on the side of Bigtable. Bigtable is a big storage system. We're doing this migration, and one of the engineers wrote a script. They essentially was going to take the whole night to run. They launched it on their machine. They tested it, but they launched it from their machine in the office. And then it was going to run for however many hours it take to run. And then they went home at like 5 p.m. They walked out of the building. And within like 15, 20 minutes, we started getting pages. Like page. The whole pager started going off. But what ended up happening was there was a small bug in the script that effectively wound up adjusting the quotas for the system in such a way that it reset the quotas for all of the production instances running in GCP to 0. And that meant that if you had any GCP Kubernetes workers, they just got dumped to 0. You'd have no quota, shut down, right? Just nothing. And so we went off, we're like, crap, what's going on? How's this going on? And we putting on the chat. And then this engineer, like from the subway, is like, oh, I think it's my script. Can you stop it? And we're like, how are we going to stop it? Oh, you can't log into my computer. So just unplug my computer. So we literally went to that person's desk. We unplugged the computer and the computer shuts down. Great. And so the script stops. Then we stabilize the environment. It was the case. Anyway, did we blame the engineer? No, we didn't actually blame the engineer. What we said is you should not be allowed to run these kinds of production changes from your desktop. Like that shouldn't happen. Like that's a loophole in our system that we need to fix. And so we went ahead and we said, okay, how do we make sure that in moving forward, if you have to make these kinds of changes, that they're running in a monitored environment, that they've been reviewed, they've been checked, there's a whole process behind it, but at the same time, don't add so much friction that it slows everybody down. Like, how do we find that balance? So the postmortem was, like this screwed up and this, this was a problem, but how do we make sure that that we don't run into this issue in the future? That was number one. Number two in that one, we identified a bug with the system that you should never be able to reset quotas to 0 for no reason. Like that's also a bug in the system. Why was that allowed? So we fixed that bug, and then we found some other issues. So there was a bunch of things that came out of that postmortem. And how we just sat there and be like, oh, you person, you did this bad thing, fire you, there would have been a problem. But we actually did what I was managing that team at the time. I said, hey, person, you get to own this postmortem. You caused the outage, but you get to own the postmortem. And this person that wound up owning the postmortem, they were a fairly junior engineer. They wrote it up, they documented it, then they drove all of those improvements. And in their next performance review, it wasn't used them negatively against them. On the contrary, it was in a positive way to show, hey, they identified all of these flaws in the system. Here are all of their proposed improvements, and here's how they drove the improvement in the outcome. So as opposed to sitting there and blaming this person, making them feel bad, I actually used this as a learning opportunity and to uplift this engineer and have them rise up. So
the engineer and the organization, improve the organization.
Exactly, right. So that's a really big focus when you do it in a blameless way. You are having the opportunity to examine, the process and the systems and the ecosystem as opposed to just, pointing a finger at someone.
It also reminds me of aviation after any kind of catastrophe, which is an accident analysis, and it's never about people. It's about the system around this, and it's incredibly interesting. And maybe I will go back, take a step back to the previous question. Are there still peer or human-led peer reviews of the code at Google?
Well, as of 6 months ago when I last was there, yes.
Okay.
People review the code, yeah. There's a lot of automation for the code review process. So you'll find that, everything from linting to library refactoring, it's not uncommon to get an automated code change review from some bot that comes in there and says, oh, this API has been deprecated. This is the new one. Here's the auto-generated fix. Hit the OK button if it looks good to you. Or we're deleting these code because we can't find any usage of it and you were the last person to touch this file. So, say okay if you feel that this code path can be deleted. You have a bunch of those that come through. The actual code reviews themselves are still done by humans. They're not done by machine there, but there's a fair amount of support in terms of the automation. But honestly, the automation is very linty and not very AI. That's what I would describe it.
Okay. All right. Lesson number 5.
Sure. Error budgets. Okay. So error budgets are wild. And this is a completely shift in perspective. So imagine for a moment you have a service. No service is ever going to be 100% reliable. Nothing's ever 100% reliable. So you strive for some level of reliability. Let's call it 3 nines. So 99.9% of the time your service is reliable. And you got to be specific in how you define that. 99.9% of requests come in and you serve them with a 200, or you serve them within some millisecond, or you serve them within some error rate, or you provide that, whatever this metric it is. Doesn't matter. Pick. Define that metric. What it actually tells you is that you have 0.1% error budget, which means you can fail 0.1% of the time and it's okay. You don't have to worry about it. If your system is meeting that 99.9%, you don't have to keep chasing anything above that. Anything above that is wasted energy. Go do something else with your time. That's number 1. Number 2, you can actually experiment in that window. So imagine for a moment you have a million requests that you're processing a day, and you want to serve 99.9%. So that means that you have about 10,000 requests a day that you can experiment with. Whatever it is that you want to do. Maybe you want to try a new authentication flow. Maybe you want to try a new storage engine. Maybe you want to try, slowing down the request. Maybe you want to reroute them to a whole new service or a whole new API. You can do that and you will never break the SLO, right? You will still be fine and reliable and not have to worry about it. And that's a really important detail and a key detail, that you can do that experimentation and you have that error budget available to you. And this actually flies in the face of what most engineers feel, because most engineers are like, no, I have to make it as reliable as possible. Yes, I'm at 99.9, but I can do 7 nines and I'm going to put all of my energy, but why? We said we're going to do 3 nines. We're doing 3 nines. It's fine. Good enough. Move on.
Yeah, and I've heard it each 9, the cost of each 9 is actually exponential. Yeah? So it grows exponentially.
Exactly.
So it's usually not worth it.
It's not worth it. Yeah, there was a Netflix paper on it back, I think, in 2012 or 2013, where they showed that each extra 9 of reliability was like costing them like 10x of the previous. Like it was just obscenely expensive. And they effectively said something like, yeah, we're just not going to bother. We're going to do 4 9s and it's good enough and move on.
Maybe some mission critical systems like, I don't know, aviation, banking, and even banks are not that reliable.
Yeah, so it's funny. I fly planes as a hobby, and you would be surprised how much can fail in a plane and the plane still flies, and how much backups
exactly.
and things that there.
So I think they solve it by having multiple copies of the same thing, and if you have a combination of 3 9s, two 3 9s, then it's actually almost impossible. So this is how you can also solve it.
In aviation side of things, I had alternators fail over water twice. And then the first time it failed, I freaked out. And then I had to reserve back to my wait, how does the engine actually work? Does it matter? Not really, because I have magnetos. So I have 2 magnetos. I have on each side of the engine. Well, a magneto is different than a spark plug, because a spark plug needs a battery. A magneto doesn't. A magneto, as long as the engine's running, keeps generating its plug. So I could have lost the alternator. I could have lost one set of magnetos, and I could have still continued to fly without, it would have been a little bit of a rough flight at that point, but it would have continued to fly to shore and make it fine. So you have these redundancies that sort of fail, and you're like, okay, I can keep moving on.
So maybe one question. So you were in the SRE team, yeah? So this kind of reliability metrics were important to you, but like a regular engineer, a programmer, do they bother about these metrics as well?
Absolutely, because you will very quickly realize that the entire company is driven by these metrics. So Sheets, when I was on Google Sheets, I was not SRE, I was Suite. And so we were very much focused on performance. My job was effectively performance. How fast is the calculation engine running? And it was everything from initial load times of the page to rendering, to scrolling, to calculation times, to the number of objects in the page, to what was the fail rate for imports of documents. When I joined the Sheets team, one of my first projects was to improve the rate of imports, because we were effectively, failing about 10% of all documents people were trying to import, i.e. CSV, Excel, whatever other format of documents, 10% of them were failing. So we actually need to get behind that. That's not an SRE function. SRE's got nothing to do with it, because from their perspective, hey, the service is reliable, right? It's not failing. You're failing to import them because you have bugs in your code. You're not supporting different edge cases, and you have null pointer exceptions, and you're timing out. And so that was very much an engineering function to drive those cases down. And so engineers are constantly looking at that. Day one, you will be introduced to what our business metrics are, what are we looking after, what are we babysitting, and you will own those metrics. And
were this also your KPIs as an engineering manager you were assessed against?
Yes, so absolutely. So we don't use KPIs, we use OKRs, but within OKRs, it's stated oftentimes in terms of reliability, or in terms of performance, or in terms of some other metric that you can point to and say, hey, we're driving into this metric up or sideways or whatever it is. When you're going up for promotions as an engineer or an engineering manager, you have to demonstrate impact. Impact is always measured in very specific numbers. You can't say something like, John was a hugely impactful engineer. They enabled lots of other people to do great work. No, you have to be, John solved this and this problem, which was quantified in this way, and they enabled this thing, and they did it like this. You have to be super specific, because that's what you're being measured against. So you need to know the metrics, you need to know the dashboards, you need to know the instrumentation, and you need to drive those numbers.
That's great. And this is something you were doing for your subordinates, yes?
I mean, I'm setting the standards at the top level for the organization for my teams, but this was everybody knew what their metrics were. We would review them, we would look at them, we would check them, and every week, almost every single week, when we were doing our weekly meeting, I would pull up a dashboard, or we would be looking, or somebody else would pull up the dashboard, and we're looking at the numbers. We had regression monitoring, we had alerting. If we missed something, we had a sister team that was responsible for some of the broader regression metrics. We would get an email. We would get an email from them. It would go to us, and somebody would have to own it. And It would be a bug filed in the system, and you have to figure out what happened. And this was, I'll give you an example. If the binary size increased by, let's say, 20 KB on the front end, you were going to get a bug. And if you couldn't articulate why it increased by 20 KB and you had an explanation, you're going to spend a whole bunch of time digging in. So you better have a really good explanation why it increased by 20 KB. What's the feature that you added? What's the library? What's the code? Could it have been less? So there was a lot of that. And you
okay,
have to
and now something that connects this approach with this blameless postmortem.
Yeah.
Assume that there is an availability of Google Sheets for some time, yeah? And there needs to be an investigation, and it can be either on the code level, let's say on the application level, or infrastructure level, which is probably managed by a separate team. Do I assume correctly?
No, it's us. We own the whole thing.
Ah, okay. So it's never, because I was wondering about this, throwing things over the fence, and okay, so it's under one umbrella, and it's like total responsibility of that team, yes?
Let me clarify it. Let's say, we store our data in something called Spanner. If Spanner has an outage and it causes our outage, so we're not responsible for Spanner. The Spanner team is responsible for Spanner. If there is a Borg outage, it never happened in my watch, but if let's say, imagine there's a Borg outage and Borg goes down, we're not responsible for Borg, but it's the Borg team's responsibility. But everything that's within the application area, that's our responsibility.
Got it. Yeah, I think this is pretty clear because it's pretty clear to identify. You have a separate service, yes. Yeah, okay, great. How about the next lesson?
Okay, clarity and communication. So this one took me a little while to really appreciate, but essentially with everything you do, there's a huge emphasis on specificity and clarity. You have to be very precise in how you communicate. Email, design, again, going back to design documents, presentations, you can't be wishy-washy. Like, this whole thing of using lots and lots of words to hide the fact that you don't know what you want to say, or you want to hide whatever it is you're trying to communicate, is just not there. Specific, precise, exact. You write those emails and you draft them in a doc, and then you circulate it with all your peers for review, and they check it and recheck it and recheck it. And then, once you agree that this looks good, everybody signs off, then you send it. And you have to learn how to be very, very good in communicating and being very clear. What is the direction that you're setting? Why are you setting it? What are the objectives? What's going to happen with it? And getting into that level where just the clarity of the communication, the specificity is key. Whenever you see some teams or managers or TLs start hiding behind wishy-washy communication, you get into trouble. So the organization and the culture forces you into just very clear, precise, crisp communication from all sides. I remember some of the first reorg emails or some of the first priorities emails that I would draft. My manager would rip it apart and be like, no, this is wrong, this is bad, like you're missing this point, this and this, whatever it was. And he was right. I would get annoyed about it, be like, no, I know what I mean. He's like, no, but it could be read in this other way. It could be misinterpreted. And what do you mean by this? And what do you mean by that? And learning to really, really get comfortable with that specificity was important.
Is it something that's being, first of all, verified during the interview process? And the second question is for new joiners, yeah? And people come from different backgrounds. It's not a very common thing to put such a big emphasis on this clear communication. Does the company help somehow to reach it, or people just learn by doing it?
If you are a more junior individual, then it's obviously not something we're going to test for. If you're coming out of college, we're not going to expect you to written or spoken form to have that clarity and specificity. We'll coach you into that over time, but we're not expecting you that. If you're being hired as a manager during the interview process, one way or another, it's sort of being sussed out, but maybe not directly. But there is sort of these elements of, okay, how are you communicating? How are you speaking? Are you being direct? Are you being specific? Are you giving examples, or are you waving your hands? So that's being looked at. And then obviously the more senior you become, the more people look at it, right? The more it becomes. But within the organization, Okay, one of the flaws at Google, and this is something to be really aware of, Google does a horrible job of, and I'm being honest about this. You could ask a bunch of other people; they'll tell you the same thing. Google does a horrible job of development. There's no real structured development process at Google. Other companies have courses and they invest in learning and in education and upskilling. Google doesn't really do that. It's like, the most you're going to get is the annual HR, sexual harassment training. That's the most development the company does, pretty much. On occasion, there's going to be some random course or something rather that pops up, but for the most part, it doesn't happen. The expectation is that managers are also mentors and coaches, and they provide that feedback, and you absorb the content through osmosis by being in that environment and growing from around you. And that the other element is that Google tries to hire people who are intrinsically motivated. So a lot of the people that you're working with are developing themselves on their own. So they're sharing the content that they're reading, they're circulating the material, they're themselves taking classes, or they themselves are learners. So if you're the kind of person who's just like, well, I went to college 15 years ago, I'm fine, I don't need to learn anymore, Google's not the place for you. They expect that you're investing in yourself. They'll give you a budget, but they expect that you invest in yourself.
Got it. So probably people that don't develop themselves, they don't stay long.
Yep.
Okay. The next point.
Sure. Next one is speed of iteration. So this is one that you're going to have a whole lot of at Google, is that just move quickly. Just ship, move quickly, learn. This is actually used to be the case. When I got to Google, the company literally went from code on your machine out in production to as quickly as humanly possible. And over time, it slowed down, and they've tried to put guardrails to make sure that it's we're not shipping utter crap, but they've tried to really improve the guardrail system. But it still tries to go as quickly as possible and learn as much as possible. So there's a lot of emphasis on experimentation, feature flagging. The idea is, we'd rather run 10 experiments in parallel and see which one sticks and see which one works, as opposed to trying to figure what one thing is going to be the perfect thing. No, we don't know. Let's just try, see what we can learn. Go quickly, push it out, fix the bug quickly, iterate on it quickly, get things done. It's not perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect as long as we're making progress. And I think a lot of people have this desire of no, I really have to make it perfect the first time out. No, you don't. It's fine. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just make it work. And so getting comfortable with the fact that you're going to ship crap sometimes, or something that looks like crap, but it works and it gets you to the right results, is a skill.
I think it plays well with I would say Google very often publishes products or releases products in a beta state, which when you start using them, you consider, wow, it works pretty well. Whereas on the other hand, I'm not sure if I should call out the name, but Microsoft, for instance, they release production ready systems which are full of flaws. Yeah. So I assume this is you release fast, market as beta, let someone test it with disclaimers.
There's actually a slightly different thing that's going on, if you will pay closer attention. When Google releases products, it will oftentimes release a product that works really well, but it's a very, very minimal product. Take a look at, I think a great example of this is Google Domains. Google Domains is a highly minimal product. It's very simple. It doesn't have very many flags. It doesn't have rich configurability, but it does its thing pretty well. And you look, if Microsoft was to release a domains version product, it would have every single configuration imaginable to the human world, and half of them wouldn't work, right? So Google narrows in, what is the specific thing we want to do, right? And that helps. And then obviously the product very notoriously is the longest in beta product in Google's history. And then they came out of beta and then they sold it a month later. So.
Okay, but it's quite interesting. So it's more about feature set, not about the quality of the product.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's interesting. All right, so I think we have 2 points left.
Yeah. So I think the next two, we can actually group them together. One of them is trusting each other and transparency. And so it used to be the case, this is something that's changed over the last 3-4 years, but Google had a uniform hiring bar across the whole company. So, you're interviewing for, let's say, the Zurich office or the Dublin office, but you could have a person in New York interviewing, or Mountain View, or whatever, Singapore. They're conducting the interview, and the committee that's hiring you, doesn't matter whether you're UX, PM, software engineer, engineering manager, the committee is sitting in some centralized place, and they just get the packets, right? And then they review the packets against the standard in terms of the feedback, and they're holding the standard bar. So it's not like a manager's making the final decision, it's a committee that's making a decision that never saw you intentionally. They don't know you, they never saw you, they have no idea who you are. And so what winds up happening is that when you're creating that kind of culture, when you're hiring people, you effectively know that everybody across the organization is at the same bar. They're effectively at the same, if you're working with an L4 software engineer, you know what to expect. That's an L4 software engineer, whether they're on Google domains or in flights or in search or in Spanner, whatever team they are, you know approximately who that person is. So that establishes like a huge level of trust. If you're working with an engineering manager or a technical lead, you know what to expect. And so you know that if you're going to ask some team for a deliverable, you're going to ask them for some kind of a product, you know that they're going to deliver on it, or they're not going to deliver on it because they'll tell you that they're not going to get it done. But the key detail, the really key detail, is that establishes a high level of trust. And you always operate from a position of trust. If I ask them, they have the best intentions in mind. They're not going to try and play politics. They're not going to play games. They're not going to do something weird. They're really genuinely committed to doing the right thing. And so that's a really big element there. And before Google, it came from an organization where that wasn't the case. There was a lot of mistrust. There was a lot of backstabbing, a lot of political games, and you could see the political games. And in Google, for the most part, it doesn't fly. It used to not fly. It's changed over the last couple of years, and part of the reason I left. But it used to not fly. Like, politics just didn't have a place at the decision-making table. You had a trust. You relied on each other. You worked as a unit, as a group. And that's a really big, that's a big element of it, which actually goes to transparency, because if you go to Team X and you tell them, hey, we need X, Y, Z from you, or we need why didn't you implement a feature in this way, and why didn't you think about this issue? They'll be like, oh, here's a design document, and here's a set of bugs, and here's our decision-making process. Here you go. Do you disagree with it? And then once you read the whole chain of discussion that went into it, you're like, oh, okay, fine. I get it, right? And it makes you feel a little bit silly. I remember there was on Sheets, there was some engineer. It was a fairly junior. I wouldn't say junior to Google. He was not a junior engineer, but he was junior to Google. And he sent us a few very nasty emails about how could you not serve support case is, and it's how hard could it possibly be, and it's this very easy problem, and I solved this problem so many times. And I took a deep breath and I said, okay, let me show you all over the whole chain. And I was very politely said, here's why we did X, here's why we did Y, here's a decision, here's a decision, here's a doc, here's a doc, here's a bug, here's a bug. How would you like us to approach it differently that we haven't considered before? Here's the full chain. Now what? And so that conversation
never came back.
What?
He never came back.
No, never came back. Yeah.
That's really positive, yeah?
Right. So you get sometimes people like that. And Google's known for having jerks here and there on occasion, but 150,000 people, you're not going to avoid it. But
my question, yeah, I mean, about the soft aspects. So I assume you can expect certain level from people, being hired at a similar position. But how about soft aspects? Yeah, are they being validated? And then is it something that you can expect the similar behaviors, the understanding of the culture and values?
Yeah, yes and no. I think Google for a long time was a very, very sharp culture. It was not a cuddly culture. It was not a place where anybody cared for your feelings. It was the attitude in the company was I don't give about your feelings. It's very much no, I'm going to tell you exactly what I think. And then it started changing because a lot of people started getting offended and it became softer and softer. It became much more mushy-washy. And there was an email from Oars. It was called the No Assholes Rule. And it was really sort of saying we're not going to tolerate this anymore. And I don't think it had the intended outcome, because what wound up happening is that a lot of the fairly direct communication turned into very awkward backstabbing behind closed doors, and it sort of went underneath, and it actually made, I think, things worse. And when the company was much more direct, I think it was a better place, in my opinion. Sometimes it would hurt your feelings, and nobody insulted anybody ever. Nobody actually told anybody they're an idiot to their face, but they would be very direct in terms of what their feedback was and what they thought and how they thought that something should be done differently. And that's fine. I think that's perfectly reasonable. In terms of the soft skills, I think it's a very interesting area, because you find that it's something that you can manipulate during the interview. I found way too many people who are very good at coming across as the most nice and polite and polished people during the interview process, and then you start working with them, and a quarter in, you're just like, who the hell is this person? Like, what in the world? This is not where I thought I was hiring. It happens, and it's not great. But the soft skills at Google are very much around, how do you negotiate? How do you bring everybody together? How do you find people? How do you get people to align on things that they don't agree on? There's an internal, there's a sort of concept that Google is called leadership without authority. Are you able to lead other people without necessarily having the quote unquote authority to do that? And some of the most effective leaders at Google, the principals or the distinguished engineers, stepped into those roles. They became those individuals, not because of a title, because if you're meeting with them in the room, you often have no clue what their title is. Nobody comes in there and says, hi, I am the distinguished engineer for this project. No, they just say, hi, I'm George, or hi, I'm, Martha, or whatever. And then, you talk to them, and then later on you find out, oh, wow, like this is a distinguished engineer responsible for this whole area. But they're able to articulate themselves and drive to a decision, using what we might call soft skills. But it's very much like, okay, are you able to understand the people? Are you able to understand the business and the dynamics? Are you able to figure out who are you talking to, and how do you structure things, and how do you take care of the whole organization? And so it's there. Obviously, it's hard to test for, but it's there. And the successful people have them very, very well. And the unsuccessful ones don't have them. And so they don't succeed.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Is it being one of the factors that impact your progression within the company?
What do you mean?
Yeah, I mean, is it like if you want to progress in the ladder, yeah? So I assume technical skills is one thing that's being evaluated, but this kind of leadership acumen as well, or? Or it has nothing to do with where you are in the ladder?
It has nothing to do with where you are in the ladder. Yeah, I think it's something you need to have to be able to do that. Like, I think if you're a L3 or L4 IC, I think it's less necessary. And I think if you want to become a senior engineer or a staff engineer, it becomes much more necessary. If you're an engineering manager, it's a must. It's a given. You're not going to be able to be a people manager at Google for very long if you don't have decent enough people skills, because it's not just about managing your staff. It's about all the cross-functional people you have to work with. And if the cross-functional peers don't want to work with you because you're a jerk, so then, you're not going to be very successful. Yeah.
Okay, so we should be slowly wrapping up.
Sure.
Out of all the things you mentioned, I think that many of them, they don't apply to, let's say, engineering manager kind of role within the company, I think universal. But however, from your perspective or from the perspective of this role in the company, what have you found the most rewarding or the most valuable lesson you took out of it?
I think the most rewarding thing for me as a people manager was actually seeing my people grow. I can't tell you.
So it wasn't focused on you, but...
No, it's on your teams. Yeah, I'll tell you what. My most satisfying days and my most saddest days at Google were the days when I was able to tell somebody they've been promoted, or when I had to tell somebody that either they were not being promoted, or they didn't get their promotion, or even I had a few occasions when I had to deal with performance with pips as well, and those are the hardest interactions I've had. Everything else sort of falls by the wayside, but those were the most rewarding. And the thing that Google has that I think very few other companies have is that Google has money and time on its side, and the fact that it invests in its people. So I was able to take a fair number of engineers and take them from new college graduates or from very junior engineers or folks who didn't have that much experience and invest my time and effort into them and see them go and grow from one promotion to then the next promotion, then the next promotion, and really, really see them grow and develop. And then by the time I left Google, some of those folks had been with me for, 5-6 years. And you really see that they're a completely different person than what they were before. And you can look back. And I think that's the most rewarding thing. That is something that is not
It's like
replaceable.
seeing your kids grow and doing the right thing.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah,
And
awesome.
it's very special. Yeah, you can't replace that.
And I think it's the best conclusion of today's episode. I suspect there's gonna be some questions coming from the viewers, so feel free to leave a comment or reach out to Michael directly on LinkedIn. And I know that he's also got his own blog published, so feel free to Google him and and reach out to him directly. Many thanks, Michael, for joining me.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
Yeah, you too. It's been a pleasure. Bye.
You too. Take care.